of the anatomy of the eyeball. So on the left, you have the vascular structure of the anatomy of the eyeball, an image taken from geekymedics.com. In order to learn further detail of the anatomy of the eyeball, make sure to check their website out because they have it very detailed well. Now on the right, you have a basic anatomy concept of everything that you need to know about the anatomy of the eyeball. So most of you would know the eye as just simply an organ which allows you to see, and you would most of you watching this video would have general awareness that the eye consists of what's known as the cornea, iris, pupil, and also retina, because you've always heard of retina around the different parts of the world, even retina display on TVs as well as iPhones and various different structures within the world. Now in this video, we're going to be going down into the pigmented layer as well as microscopic structures of retina, as well as the different components that make up the eye in very detail. Now on the left, we have an image taken from McGraw-Hill companies, and they have split the eye into 3 different parts. They've divided it into fibrous, vascular, and retinal layer. The fibrous layer is the most outer layer and consists of the sclera and cornea. Vascular contains the iris as well as the lens and the choroid, which is the middle layer, and then you have the retina, which is a neurovascular layer as well as a pigmented layer. Now, if you look carefully in the image, we have the sclera, which is the most outermost layer, almost like the egg, the white part of the egg, and then you have the yolk in the middle. So almost like that, you have the sclera, which comes all the way around and encapsulates the eye, and then forms and continues on to form a formation known as the cornea. The cornea swings back around, and then you can see it goes back around as sclera. So in this diagram, the light blue color is the sclera, and then the cornea is in the front. The cornea then is separated from the choroid, or the lens and the pupil, by a liquid known as the aqueous humor, which has an anterior and posterior chamber. The vascular layer, i.e. the middle layer, contains mainly of the choroid. So if you were to go from an anatomical point, if you were to peel it off like an onion skin, you would have the sclera first, then you have the choroid. The choroid then goes on to form, like I said before, the sclera goes on to form the cornea. The choroid goes on to form the different layers, i.e. the iris, lens, ciliary body, and various suspensory ligaments. Then you have the most innermost layer, which is the most sensitive part, which is very important because this is the layer which allows people to detect vision and see and color variations and everything, which is known as the retinal layer. This contains a pigmented layer and neural layer. Now if you come across to this side, on the right side, this is a schematic diagram where you can see the sclera is highlighted in dark grey and it swings back around to the front to form the cornea. The cornea is then separated from the so you can see here the purple is a choroid. It goes on to form what's known as here as the ciliary muscles, and then you have the iris. And just below the iris, you have what's the pupil. So the iris contains the muscle which allows the dilation, or known as the mydriasis and meiosis of the eye. So if you don't know what that means, it's basically when you shine light into your eye, the eye kind of expands. The pupil iris muscles contract and they expand depending on where the light, depending on the exposure of the light. That controls the amount of light that enters the lens and then back into the retina. So you have sclera, cornea, choroid, which goes on to form the lens, pupil, iris. So the pupil is a middle dark little hole, or the dark part, and the iris is the colored. So when people say people have a certain type of genotype or phenotype such as blue eyes, they're referring to the iris. They don't refer to the cornea. I've heard people say that you have white cornea, or everyone has white cornea, sorry, you have a blue cornea or brown. No, they're referring to the iris. So the iris is what gives the color of the eye. The pupil always remains usually dark black. And then you have the lens, which causes the diffraction and refraction of light, which then contracts the light into the posterior part of the eye, which we'll go into detail of what happens. Now here we have a schematic diagram, which is very important because once you understand this diagram, you would understand these 2D type images of the eye. I couldn't find a 3D anatomy model of the eye because I don't have the software for it, hence why I'm using 2D images taken off Google Images. Now layer by layer anatomy of the eye consists, like I said before, the outermost layer is the sclera, which is imagine it as the egg white, or the white part of the egg, and then you have the choroid. So sclera is the biggest part, then you have the choroid that slides into that, and then the most innermost part is the retina. And then you have what's known as the fovea, and then you have a macula. These two are very important structures, which we'll touch later on in this video when we talk about the retinal layers. Now, before we go, like I said before, the sclera continues on to form the cornea. The cornea can be split into various different components. It has 5 layers: the epithelial, Bowman's layer, stroma, Discman's membrane, and endothelium. Between the Discman's membrane, so on the right you have an image which is not so clear, between the Discman's membrane and the endothelial cell, endothelium, or the stroma, you have what's known as the limbal stem cells. The limbal stem cells can always rejuvenate because since they're stem cells, they have progenitor type cells which can always renew themselves, hence why your cornea keeps on renewing itself to become new every so often. Now the innermost layer, which was described, so in this image, before we look at the writing on the right, you can see that the sclera is the outermost layer and then comes into form the cornea. Then you have the choroid, which is the brown part where the mouse is pointing to, or you can see here, which is taken out. The choroid is a vascular, it's supplied by blood vessels that goes on to form what's known as here is the suspensory ligament of the lens. Then you have the pupil, which is a small slit-like gap, and then you also have the iris muscles, which is here. So the iris is this part, the pupil the middle part, and then you have the lens at the back. The lens is one of the most important components of the eye. The vitreous humor then continues and forms the rest of the inside part of the eye as well. So now let's look at the retina, which is the most innermost layer. Inside the retina there's fovea and macula, like previously mentioned, but in terms of your understanding, the retina is the innermost layer. Now, is usually thin and very semi-transparent, and is a multi-layered sheet of neural tissue that lines the inner aspect of the posterior two-thirds of the wall of the globe. So the posterior two-thirds. So usually the boundaries of the retina usually starts from the optic disc, which is found here where the mouse is pointing to. So you can see the optic disc here labeled on the screen, and it extends all the way to the ora serrata, which is somewhere around where the mouse is pointing to now. So here. So from the retina does not encapsulate the whole area. In fact, how it does is it comes around like this and then swings back around. So imagine it like a 3D layer of sheet. So it goes from ora serrata, which is here, just posterior to the lens, and all the way down to the optic disc. So it covers 2/3 of the posterior part of the eyeball with a surface area of around roughly 266 millimeters square, and they're very thin and semi-transparent, and it's the innermost layer. Now there are 3 distinct regions within the retina. So you have an optic disc, and we also said the optic disc is where it starts and it ends in remember the optic disc was here where the mouse is pointing to. So look on the image here where my mouse is pointing to on the right side of your screen. The optic disc starts here and the ora serrata finished somewhere around here where the yellow part ends. The image shown on the screen is not very clear, but you just had to make do with it. Then within the distinct regions of retina, you have what's known as important areas such as optic disc, which is a blind spot, and you also have macula lutea and peripheral retina. So in order to understand these different parts, you need to go back a slide. So remember I told you that within the retina there are something known as the fovea and the macula. So they're also just like the layers of the eye, but scientists have not classified them as exactly layers of the eye. They're transparent and very like gel-like structures within the eye. So imagine this image here. Now, the 3 most important parts are the optic disc, macula lutea, and the peripheral retina within the eye. Now, these 3 different components are very important themselves. Now, the optic disc is found here, is where the starting point is, usually 1.5 millimeters in diameter, and this is where all the retinal layers terminate, and the nerve fibers which pass through the lamina cribrosa. Then you have the macula lutea, which is a macular layer, and the macula lutea is comparatively usually around 5.5 millimeters in diameter, or sometimes is known as the area centralis, or yellow spot. Within the macula lutea, there is a middle part known as the fovea. So on the left-hand side, you can see this region here is known as the macula within the retina, and within the middle part of the macula, you have something known as the fovea centralis, and inside the fovea centralis, you have something else known as a lumbo or umbo. Now, the peripheral retina, i.e., the area towards the end, there's 3 different parts of the retina that you can be divided into 4 regions. You have a near periphery, which is here, mid periphery, somewhere around here, far periphery, and ora serrata, which is here. So near periphery, and periphery meaning back of the eye, mid periphery, far periphery, and ora serrata. So you have different layers. So if something is going wrong, you need a laser surgery or something, they differentiate the location of the peripheral retina by using these categories of differentiation. So they use these 4 different types of location. So you have 4. So you have near, mid, far, and ora serrata, which is the point here. So 3 important parts are the optic disc, macula lutea, and peripheral retina. Now, the blood supply to the eyeball comes from the ophthalmic artery, which is a branch of the internal carotid artery. Now, the optic nerve comes directly through the central optic nerve canal, or known as the optic nerve. So in this image, you can see the optic nerve passes through here, and the central artery and the central vein goes through here, just posterior to the optic disc. Whereas the rest of so the main ones that supply the retina are the central retinal artery. So this is another image taken from geekymedics.com. So you can see here the central retinal artery goes in to supply the retina, which is the innermost layer of the eye. The other branches that come off the ophthalmic artery include the short posterior ciliary arteries. They go on to supply the ciliary muscles, which are involved in meiosis and mydriasis. You have the continued retinal artery, which goes on to supply the rectus muscles, lateral and superior and medial rectus muscles. And then you have the long posterior ciliary muscles, as well as the lacrimal artery, which is to supply the lacrimal gland. So the main ones, pause the video and understand these blood vessels. Now, the microscopic structure of retina is very important. It consists of 10 different layers. The first layer includes pigmental layer. Then you have a photoreceptor known as the cones, rods, and all these type of layers. Then you have an outer nuclear layer, before that you have an external limiting membrane, which is here. So you first start off with the retinal pigment or pigment epithelium, and then you have the cones and rods, then you have an external limiting membrane, then you have outer nuclear membrane, then plexiform, inner nuclear membrane, inner plexiform. So again, from bottom, pigment, cones and rods, external limiting membrane, outer nuclear, outer plexiform, inner nuclear, so nuclear, plexiform, nuclear again, and then you have inner plexiform, then ganglion and nerve fiber, and finally you have internal limiting membrane. The light hits from this angle down this way, so